Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do data imports for NetSuite. Now, there's two main reasons you would do a data import. Either one, you're doing your first transfer over from your legacy system to NetSuite, and you didn't migrate over that legacy information. And then secondly, you might just have records that you're trying to get into your NetSuite. That might be invoices, that might be customer records, anything that you have outside of NetSuite that you want to bring in larger quantities into NetSuite as opposed to just inputting them one by one. Regardless of whatever the reason for doing the import is, the basics of data import are identical. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you both how to do a data import and some of the most common problems you're going to run into when doing these imports, as well as a trick on how you can do especially larger or more complicated imports with zero errors. So let's take a look at this. So here we are on our home dashboard, and to start the process, we're going to go to Setup, and we're going to go down to Import Export, and we're going to import CSV records. The first thing we have here is, notice over here we have this import assistant. So we've got these 5 steps, and it kind of gives you that mapping and that basic concept of the process we're going to go through. So the first thing we have is we're going to upload the file itself. So first we have to select what type of file are we dealing with. So if you're bringing in customer records, you might select relationship. In this case, we're going to bring in some sales orders, and I'm actually going to show you the document here. So here we have this record, and as you can see, basically what we're importing is 10 sales orders that we want to have in our NetSuite instance. So just a quick orientation, on the left side we have external ID, so you can see it's sales order 807-1, and then moving on. We have the name of the customer or client. We have the date that the sales order was made. We have the location that's associated with that sales order. Here we have all the items that were purchased, and in instances where it's just one item purchased, you'll see that it gets one row in this grid, in this CSV record. But in instances where maybe there was multiple items that were part of that sales order, or you could say that it has multiple line items, that gets put as multiple lines here. So here we have, these are all one sales order. It's the same name, same date, all of that, but then each of them have a different line item. So they just simply add rows to show the various items that are going into that one sales order. We then have quantity, rate, and amount. So those are all pretty straightforward. So this is what we're going to be importing, and you might have even noticed just at a glance a couple things that are obviously wrong with this import. So we're not going to get into that right now. As we go through the process, I'll point out in layers some of the more common errors you're going to run into, but this is just an orientation of what we're dealing with. So I'm going to minimize this. And obviously if we're dealing with sales orders, we're going to want to select the import type as transaction. So I'm going to hit select transaction, and then record type. It then narrows down to various transaction record types, and we're going to select sales order. So now that we have those two selected, we're going to skip the character encoding because that's fine. Also the CSV column delimiter, CSV is for comma separated values. So obviously a comma is the correct thing to separate various columns. So we're going to leave that as is. And then we're going to come down here. We see we can either do one file to upload or we can do multiple. Now, the reason you'd want to do multiple is if you're dealing with certain records that require maybe bringing in more spreadsheets at the same time. For example, if you're bringing in credit memos, you might need to bring in multiple files at once just to actually have all the information you need for the credit memos. In this case, because we're dealing with the sales order, it's actually pretty straightforward. So we're just going to bring in this one file, and that's all we need. So we're going to select the file that we need, which if we go to select, we're going to go over here and we have this file called test data imports, which is a CSV file. So we're going to click on that. Now at this point, this is the first kind of gate where we could have run into errors. For example, if we selected an Excel file or a file that was completely blank, we would get an error message. So it's a little bit of that first gate of issues you could run into. Also, I'd like to make a mention at this point that one of the best tips you can have when you're doing an import, especially if it's a larger import or if you're not very familiar with imports, is simply import. If you've got, let's say, this huge spreadsheet with 30,000 sales, just import the first item. Bring in that first item, make sure that the process works fine, and also then go in NetSuite, find that item, look at it, and make sure that it's with all the information that you want and that it came through exactly how you expected. Once you've got one down, you're pretty safe in thinking that you can now import all of the rest of the items and they'll come through with no problems. So that's just a quick tip of kind of navigating some of the more difficult imports. But we've got the import that we want. It's only 10 sales orders, so it's pretty straightforward. We're going to go to next. At this point, so we've now moved to the step 2, which is the import options. We can either do an add, which is we're just bringing in new information, which is common, or you can do an update. Let's say you have a bunch of customers and you've changed the way that you've organized the information for the customers and you want to make a change to a bunch of those records. You could bring in that information as an update and it would make those modifications. Now, add or update, the option to do both at once, is more complicated and much more prone to errors. So I don't recommend you try to navigate both of them at the same time unless you're quite familiar with this process. You also have these advanced options down here. I'm not going to get into them all, but you can take a look through them. They're pretty straightforward. They give you a little description and you can see if any of them apply to the situation you're in. But with what we have now, I'm going to hit next. Okay, so here we are at the field mapping, which is really the main area of the data import. And this is where we're basically saying, okay, we have our record on one side and we have NetSuite on the other side, and the data that NetSuite expects to receive. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to map and tie these two things together. So the left-hand side, what we're looking at is our file, and then the right-hand side here is the NetSuite side, and we're going to be bringing them together in the middle. So you can see NetSuite will make an attempt to map things just from the get-go. So for example, we can see we've got fields like, and this is on our side in our record, we've got name and it ties it to, in this case, it tied it to customer because on the NetSuite side, the sales order, that field called customer is the name of the customer. So it's actually figured out that those two things are the same. Notice we also have this required field here, which is simply saying that customer is a required field. So we would have to map that with something. We can't just leave it blank. So name to customer is totally fine. External ID to external ID, that's good. Location, location. Okay, so here we've run into a problem where on the NetSuite side, status is a required field. So it has to be filled, but we don't have status as a column in our document. So NetSuite's actually kind of figured out, it knows that for status, it defaults out of the two options that are available, which is pending fulfillment and pending approval, it defaults to pending to fulfillment. So it's actually just filled that in and just automatically considered, well, that should be the default. But in certain instances, we might want to change that. So the way you would do that, see these pencils on the left? If you click on that, it gives you this thing and it basically allows you to hard code map what you want that thing to be. So instead of it being pending fulfillment, we might want to select pending approval and make that the case for all the records that we're bringing in, they would default to pending approval. Of course, if there was differences in the items, we might have to add an additional column in our CSV file that has the status and does differentiate which items are pending fulfillment and which ones are pending approved. So in this case, we're actually fine with pending fulfillment. So I'm going to hit cancel and we'll leave that as a hard-coded pending fulfillment. Next, we have date to date. That's fine. Amount to amount. So here we have the first kind of problem, which is that the item, which is the item name really, is blank. And that's because in our CSV file, it wasn't appropriately named item. It had the name of sales, which is actually a bit of a misnomer. So we will correct that in a bit. But for now, let's actually just remap this thing because we know that sales is the correct field or the correct column. So we can simply drag that over here, drop it in, and now it will map everything that we have in sales. It'll map it to fill in the information for the item name. So that's fine. We have quantity to quantity and rate to rate. So everything is mapped appropriately and we're good to go. Now, it is important that you double check these. This is really the first major gate where you can run into issues and have things that are just NetSuite's incorrectly assuming what you should have mapped to certain places, or you might have a bunch of fields that it's not obvious where it should be mapped. So you want to make sure that even if it's auto-assumed certain mappings, you do take a look at it and make sure that it got it right in the first place. But now that we've got this good, we're fine with it, we can hit next. And here we come to our first obvious errors. This is the first place where NetSuite so far has said, you've got issues, this is not going to work out. So you need to fix them before you can proceed. And it tells you, it at least tries to tell you what these errors are. So we see certain things like the field values are not correct. We've got some problem with the date. We've also got a customer that's wrong, and then we've also got something with a 7,500 that I didn't like. So let's go to our CSV file, and let's see if we can resolve these problems. So the first thing we had, remember I mentioned that this name for the column sales was not correct. Now this wasn't an error it just gave me, but it is something we should fix. So let's change it to item. And then the first issue it gave us was, I believe, these numbers over here. So it was saying all of these numbers are incorrect. And the problem that it's running into, and this is a common error, is that it has the $sign in the number. Notice amount doesn't have a $sign, even though the amount is in USD. But NetSuite doesn't want the $sign. Whether it's a $sign, any kind of currency, could be a pound, Canadian dollar, doesn't matter. It doesn't want those currencies in the CSV file. So what we need to do is simply grab this column and we're going to select general. It's going to take off all those dollars, which is exactly how NetSuite wants that information. It also had a problem with a missing field. So this was probably the most obvious thing to spot. And it is in any CSV import. Anything that's simply omitted as a blank field is pretty easy to catch. So I happen to know that this customer should be 40 Divavu. So I'm going to put in that correct customer name. It could have been deleted for any number of reasons. Then we had a problem with this 7,500 over here. So there's the problem that we're running into here is there's a comma, and this is a CSV file. So commas are actually used to separate different columns. So CSV does not want commas anywhere in the actual numbers that we're dealing with, and they're not needed. So we're simply going to grab this number and we're going to go to the formatting and we're going to select general, which takes the comma out and gives it in a way that NetSuite will accept. Now, the last problem that we had was a date problem. And if we look at the dates here, we can see this one is a bit weirdly justified. And this is the issue that we're running into. And really what I'm trying to show here is that any kind of inconsistency with date formats is going to create a problem for you. So if you're in a different country, or if you simply have your NetSuite instance has a default formatting for its dates, which you can find if you go up to user preferences and you select on that, one of the first things on there is date formatting. So you can see what your default date is and what NetSuite likes. And then you can take a look at maybe what your computer has set or what's on that CSV file. And just make sure that those two formats are matching up, that you're not having one with dashes when your NetSuite wants slashes to differentiate month to day to year, etc. In this case, the problem that we're running into, I mean, you could really consider this as more like a typo, but I'm just trying to kind of prove the point, which is that in this case, the formatting is wonky where NetSuite's expecting it to go month, day, year. And in this case, we have the day, month, year. So it's thrown it for a loop and it doesn't know how to deal with 13 as a month. So let's simply correct that. We'll go month is July and then the day is 13. So now it's in a format that NetSuite will accept. So we've solved all the immediate problems that NetSuite gave us, and we're in a position now where we can reattempt to import this information and see if we have better luck that time. So we're going to minimize this and we're going to back up on our NetSuite side of things. We're going to come all the way back to this first step, and we're going to remove this import file that we had, and we're going to reattach. Now that we've saved that file newly, we're going to reattach it, and we're going to zip back through this. So I'll hit next. I'm fine with adding next again. Now here, I do need to make one change, but because I renamed that column from sales to item, I do need to remap that. So I'm going to hit item, drag it over here. I could also do it by simply clicking here. Notice you've got these errors. These are indicators of where you're dealing with this mapping section. So you can click around and it moves. And I could easily have clicked here and simply clicked item, and it would just automatically map it in there. I don't have to drag and drop. So now that I have everything exactly where I want it, I'm going to hit next. At this point, I do want to make a plug. If there's any topics that you have difficulty with in NetSuite, let me know in the comments below. I make a video every single week. It's not very difficult for me to make these videos, so please, if you're having trouble, let me know in the comments. I will make videos on those topics. And even if you just want to provide me some feedback, I love to hear from you guys any and all times. If you're finding this video particularly helpful, hit that like button. And of course, I come up with these videos routinely, so if you hit subscribe, you'll get access to them. So with that, let's continue. Notice we don't get any error at this point, so it's fine with what we've got. So now we need to name what this mapping is called. That way, if we're running into a future situation where we need to bring sales orders in again, we don't have to remap everything and go through the whole process. We can just grab that automatic mapping and move forward from there. So I'm going to save this as import test 2 because I already had a number 1. And you can give it a description, especially if you have a lot of different mappings and you want to remember, okay, this one was used for this and this one was used if there's also a status included. You can simply provide a description so it's obvious which one's which. With the description in there, we're going to hit save and run. Okay, so we get a confirmation banner at the top here, which is basically said that the import has begun. And if we want to see how that process is going along, we've got the click to view import job status here. So if I click on that, it brings me to this page, which is basically showing me all the imports that I have available. So in this case, because it's a pretty small import, I've got here at the top, this is the one I just did, and it has percentage complete. A lot of times if you're doing a larger import, when you come to this page, it'll only say 0% or 10%, and you just have to you keep hitting refresh until you get to the point where it's at 100%, or go for some time and come back. But just understand, it's not gonna update live. You have to hit refresh to actually get that number up to whatever the current status is. So if we take a look here, it actually gives us a message. It says 6 of 10 records imported successfully. So some of our records were fine, especially after the changes we made, but there was still 4 records that came up with errors. So we want to see what those are. We want to fix those and then re-import. So the way we're going to get that information is we're going to hit the CSV response. It's a hyperlink. If we click on that, it's going to automatically download this results file. And what we can do is we can open that up. And really what we're dealing with is the exact same grid that we had, except everything that made it into NetSuite is removed from it. So it just takes what we didn't have go through and it adds one column at the front that says error. That's going to tell us what were the common errors, or in this case, the specific errors that related to these 4 files or 4 sales orders that didn't make it in. So it pulls up this results CSV file. And so we can see here, I might have to minimize it a little bit. It's not always going to be very obvious from the thing what is exactly wrong with it, but it'll at least give you a hint as to where you should look for the problem. So here it says the item key, meaning this item is having a problem. So if we go over there, this is the issue. So really what's happening here, and this is similar to some of the errors I showed you before, there's certain characters and things that NetSuite cannot accept. And one of those things is an ampersand. So if I click here, this ampersand is just pulling up an error. NetSuite considers an ampersand to be a different thing. It doesn't like it to be used in the names of things or in records of any sort. So what you need to do is, if you do have an ampersand, let's say a customer name that has an ampersand in it, you simply need to come up with another way of naming that. If you want to use a plus symbol or literally the word and, however you want to accomplish it, but you cannot import this information into NetSuite. So in this particular case, this item actually is called iPad Pro with a little dash in between the inch and the gigabytes. So this is the correct name for this item. Again, if you didn't know, you could simply refer to your item list and be able to pull up the exact correct name. The next problem that we're running into, if we come over here, we have this problem. Now notice here we have this whole block. This is actually one sales order, but the entire sales order won't go in if any line item is wrong. So in this case, the line item that's wrong is the item that had the Dell laptop in it. So if we go to this Dell laptop, I scroll over a little bit here. So this whole thing is erroring out because of this one thing. And again, this is a problem of special characters. So this TM symbol here is not going to be acceptable by NetSuite. So we do have to remove that, which in this case, this is the correct name for this thing, is just Dell laptop, no trademark symbol. And it's just something to keep in mind. Don't try to bring in trademark symbols or any kind of special characters of any sort. Next thing, if we come over here, we have, and notice these are blank because this is all part of the same sales order. So it just simply goes to whatever the next sales order is, which is this one. And we've got this problem with Boston. So the problem is that it is a typo, which is pretty straightforward. But one thing to keep in mind, when we ran into the problem earlier where there was that customer field missing, the issue there is that that's a mandatory field. You have to have the customer. You can't leave that blank. So it gives you an error message. However, location is not a mandatory field. So if we had left Boston empty, or if we had left location empty, it would not have given us an error message. It would simply go, oh, there's no location listed. Fine, we'll make the record anyways. But because we had a typo in there, it's now forced to look amongst the locations it has and choose one amongst its list. Now, Boston with an A is not going to be on that list. So it's going to be looking for something. It's not going to be able to fit Boston into any one of its options. So we simply need to fix that typo, put the correct spelling of Boston, and that would resolve that problem. So the last thing that we have here is, again, we have this issue with the naming of this item. So let's go here. So the problem we have here, and you'll notice this is actually the same item up here. And you'll notice the problem that we're running into, which is that the dash has a missing space on either side of it. Now, that problem is really a problem of a non-exact match, meaning it's very, very close, but there's just some missing spaces. Or you could have even had something like there's an extra space, there's too many spaces. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The problem is it's a non-exact match. And that is the hardest thing to spot in a NetSuite data import, because it's not like you're just looking for an empty field or an obvious typo or dollar symbols or something that you can look for. It's really an omission often that it's just missing a little space there, or something's a little too close to each other, or some formatting's not exactly correct. And whatever it is, it's going to completely error out because of that problem. So this is the hardest one to be able to just visually look and spot those errors. But there is a trick for how to solve this, especially when you're dealing with very large imports with a lot of different columns and a lot of different data that's being imported. There is a way to get around that. And the way to do so is to use a trick called VLOOKUP, which stands for value lookup. And really what that's doing is, instead of having these really elaborate complex names that are easy to mess up, what you're going to do is the premise of a VLOOKUP is you're going to rely on the fact that NetSuite has internal IDs for all of these records. So every item in NetSuite has an internal ID associated with it. Same with customers, same with locations. Tons of information that you're going to find in any data import has an internal ID associated with it. So by relying on that internal ID, you can avoid any of these weird formatting problems and just give NetSuite the exact information it wants. It will be easy for it to accept. You can avoid a lot of errors that way. So now I'm going to show you how you would go about doing that VLOOKUP. So the first thing you're going to need to be able to do this trick at all is you're going to need to know what is the internal ID on the NetSuite side, because only NetSuite will be able to tell you that. So let's go to our NetSuite. If we click here, now I actually have it already pulled up, but you could have gone to Lists, Accounting, and over to Items, and you would come to this page, which is a list of all the items that you have, or that I have in this case, in my NetSuite instance. So I need to be able to extract this information to find the items that I'm currently trying to import and then associate them with internal IDs. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to do an export CSV. So now I have this items 59. So if I click on that, it pulls up exactly this list that I had in NetSuite. It's simply all the items that I have in my NetSuite. So I'm going to bring this grid over here a little bit. I'm going to shrink that down. We're going to zoom in on that a little bit. So I've got my item name here, and I've got the ID on the left. And one thing you have to do when you're doing this trick is you have to have the name, right? In this case, I'm trying to find the name of the item on my side and link it up. You want whatever that thing is you're looking for. It could be customer name, it doesn't matter. You want that to be the furthest to the left. So I'm gonna grab this, I'm gonna cut, and I'm gonna click right here, which is the furthest to the left. I'm gonna say insert cells. So it didn't copy over it, right? I've still got my internal ID over here, but I've got the name all the way over to the left, and you need that to be able to make this work right. So I've got my name here, I've got my internal ID here. It's got other information in there, but we don't need that. So we're gonna leave it as is. And I've got my results grid. I'm gonna bring that over here a bit, and I'm gonna scroll over a little. So the next thing I need to do is I need to add a column so that I can have my item internal ID. It doesn't need to be quite so big. So I'm going to scroll over. So what we've got on the left is the information from NetSuite of all the internal IDs and what we're going to be looking for our internal IDs. And on the right side, we have our results file, right? We've got the name up here. This is what we're going to now try to newly import to get those last four things errored out. And we have to have the internal IDs for them. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to click up here and we're going to go equals VLOOKUP. And I'm gonna do a little parentheses here. So the first thing you're gonna need to tell the formula is what is the information that we're basing this off of? And we're gonna base it off of the item name. Okay, that's the thing that we're gonna try to match in our grid and in the other grid with all the items is gonna be the item name. That's gonna be the link between the two. So we're gonna click on this column here, which has the item name. Then we're gonna hit comma. And then we're gonna say, okay, now that we know that's what you're looking for, here's where you're gonna look for it. And we're gonna go over to our other grid here. And we're gonna, if you click up in the top corner there, it actually just grabs the whole grid. So you're gonna say, we're looking for items and we're looking for it in this grid. Look for it anywhere in here. So we have that other table, and then we're gonna hit comma again. And then now that we've said, okay, you're gonna find this item in this database, once you've done that, now we wanna find that internal ID. So the internal ID, to be able to spot where that is, we need to tell the Excel formula that. The way we're going to do it is we're going to say what column we're looking for. So column A, you're not just going to select the column. That would be easy, but for whatever reason, it doesn't work that way. So what you're going to do is you're going to give it the number that's associated with the column. So if we were looking for column A, we would say 1. column B is column 2, column C is 3, etc. So in this case, internal ID, that is column B. So we're going to put in a 2 because it's the second column. So we're going to hit 2 and then we're going to hit comma again. Now the last thing you need to put in is basically the formula is going to ask, are you fine with this being a partial match? So if you've got an item name and then there's like a close item name over here, is that okay? And we want to say no, that's false. We don't want that to be acceptable. We have to have an exact match. So we're going to say false. If you are fine with being a partial match, then you can hit true. But for the sake of this VLOOKUP formula, you do want them to be exact because anything that's wrong will come up with problems. So that's unacceptable to us. So we're going to hit enter. It's going to give us this little warning, which is basically saying there's some other information in the grid, but that's totally fine. That's not a problem at all for us. So we'll hit yes. And it pulls up this internal ID. Now you should verify that it is a correct number. So let's look for this iPad Pro, this 128 gigabytes. If we look for that here, we've got it right here. And if we look at the internal ID, it is 108. So we know that that worked out correctly. So we can now take that formula and you can click this and drag it down and it fills in. So it gives us the internal IDs for all of these different items that we've got here. Now, once you've actually put these here, now notice it's still a formula. Formulas can get messed up, especially if they're drawing from certain information and that information disappears, maybe delete a file, etc. So this could actually create problems in the future. So what's I think a helpful tip is once you've gotten all those internal IDs is to go control and then paste it as a value. And once you do that, now if we go over here, notice the cell is just a number. It's no longer a formula. So those are just hard numbers that are sitting there. They're not going to get messed up. They're not going to create problems for you in the future. So now that we have all those internal IDs there, now keep in mind, if you had dragged that formula down and anything came up as NA or not applicable, that means you have an error. There is something wrong there. There's a title that's wrong. Maybe there's too many spaces or too little or some character that's wrong. Just something that's not matching up with the information of what NetSuite was expecting the item names to look like. So that's going to be, once you pull that out, and as soon as you see any NAs, you're going to know, I need to fix those. I need to find out why they're not matching. And it's pretty easy because you can simply look it up in NetSuite in this grid that we have on the left here. Find the exact wording, even copy it over if you want to. That way you'll get the exact matching title, and that way you'll know, okay, good, I know I have the exact right names, and those have now transferred over to internal IDs, so you're not going to run into any problems. And I just did that for the item name, but again, you could do that for the name of the customer, you could do that for the location name, any record, anything that has an internal ID, you could swap all of them out with the internal IDs using VLOOKUP like I just showed you. So now that we've done that, we've got what we want. We have the internal IDs here. I'm gonna hit save on that. So we've saved this record, right, called results 37. So now we're gonna try to re-import this. I'm gonna come back to my NetSuite. We're gonna go over here. So we've got 6 out of 10, remember this? So now we're gonna do a new import, but this time I just wanna show you a little trick because we saved that mapping. So we might as well use that mapping we already saved and not have to put in a bunch of information again. So I'm gonna go to import export, but instead of doing import CSV record, I'm gonna go to saved CSV imports. If I click on that, it's gonna say, all right, well, what saved CSV import? And if you remember, I called it import test 2. So I've got it down here. I click on import test 2 and it takes all that already saved mapping information and is simply going to copy it over. Things like transactions, sales order, etc. So we're already a step ahead and now we can simply select our results thing. So I'm going to go to downloads and I'm going to select this results 37 because that's the one that I just saved and I did the VLOOKUP trick on. So I'll hit next. Add is totally fine in this case. So I'll hit next. Okay. And now at this point, one thing to keep in mind when you do save that results file, you probably didn't see me do it, but you want to make sure that you take off that first column that says the error messages. You want to delete that column because it's obviously not needed for the import. If you don't, you're going to see it pop up here at the top and it's going to say error and it's just not needed. So make sure that when you do save that file, you take off the error. And then the last thing we're gonna do, so the mapping is all totally fine, but there's one thing we have to do as part of this VLOOKUP trick, which is the fact that right now we have item mapped to item, and that's not gonna help us at all because we already ran into that problem where the item names weren't correct. So what we need to do is NetSuite is gonna have item on its side, which is fine. Now on our side, we need to supply the item internal ID, and we need to tell NetSuite, this is an internal ID. So we don't want you copying it to think that the name of the item is 108 or something like that, but we do want you to look at it, know that it's an internal ID, and then supply the proper name based on that internal ID. And the way we're gonna handle that is we're gonna drag over the item internal ID over here, and then we're gonna click the little pencil there. And instead of having the reference type be name, we're gonna map it to internal ID. So we're saying this is an internal ID, reference it as such, and use that to draw the item name that you're gonna put into the sales order. So once we have that mapped, we're good to go. We're gonna hit next. We're fine with the map name staying test number 2. We don't have to put in a new name for that. So we'll hit save and run. Do I wanna overwrite the save import? I say, yeah, I'm fine with that. So again, it gives us this import job status. So I'll click on this little hyperlink and we come here. So now this time it actually says 0.0. So if I hit refresh, all right. And as you can see, we've now refreshed, we've got percentage complete 100, and you can see we've got 4 out of 4 records were successfully imported. So that is the best trick for taking larger or more complex, more involved data imports, simply swapping any record you can with the internal IDs and making sure you get these huge imports that can take hours to do without any single errors or upsets. So that's a great trick. A lot of consultants use that. And if you just follow those tricks, you kind of keep those common errors that I showed you in mind, you shouldn't have any problem doing data migrations or doing imports of records into your NetSuite. And again, if you want to subscribe to this channel or hit that like button if you found this video helpful at all, I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video.